Hey everybody, Jim Nilsen here of Photography Travel Tours. It's May 2nd, 2020, well into the coronavirus lockdown here in Washington State. Good opportunity to share with you how I process the particular image, and also a good opportunity to dig into some of your old files and look for some hidden gems. I talked last week about whether in a blog whether there is a substitute for good light, and kind of concluded that there really is not. This is a particular image that I photographed about 5 years ago in Meteora, Greece, and I bypassed this one up in my initial processing sessions when I got back from my journey. And so this is the raw file in Lightroom. There has been nothing done to this image, so I'm going to show you how I processed this in Lightroom, and then also brought it into Photoshop and worked in Photoshop mainly with Nick. And so the nice thing about working in Lightroom is that after you get done processing an image, you can create a snapshot of what you did. So there is the raw image, and then I'm going to go up here to snapshots and show you what I did to it before I brought it into Photoshop. And first of all, you'll probably notice a crop. I cropped out this bright areas here and here, and I'm going to click on the first draft, and it brings me to this here. And I changed the color profile over here to vivid, which makes it more contrasty and adds a little bit more punch. I did a little bit of tweaking on the white balance on the magenta, added some magenta, and I think I took out some yellow. Brought the exposure down to almost stop, minus 9.9. Highlights down, minus 19. I opened up the shadows to plus 70. Whites plus 10. And dehaze is a really useful tool for images like this when you're using a long lens. In this case, it was 170 millimeter on a full frame. And I can tell that because if I look up here underneath the histogram, it shows me the settings: ISO 100, 170 millimeter, f16 at 1/30th of a second. And so it's a great tool. Beware, you can overdo it with that. So I'm plus 29. I'm also plus 33 on the vibrance. I always do some sharpening. In this case, it was about plus 79. Lens correction on the profile. Remove chromatic aberration and enable the profile for this particular lens. In this case, it was the 100 to 400 on a Canon full frame. These low light images, you can see the light was pretty low in the day here, skimming across from left to right. And what's nice here is we have some nice dark shadows, but you can still see detail in them. But I've been lately kind of experimenting with some of these images to bring those shadows down even more, to really put the eye, have the eye go to the important parts of the image, while still remaining some detail so that you can tell what's going on in here. But you have this nice side light on the monastery, and also some really nice rim light here on these rocks and these great shadows. So I did want to darken it up a little bit. I'm going to go over here and click on this rectangle, which is the graduated filter. And if I go into the image, I can see where I applied a filter, and there's a dot there. I'm going to click on that. And what I had done to to make this grad is I clicked and dragged up, and then I went over here and applied the effect I wanted. In this case, I drug the exposure down minus 1.33. So those are the main things that I did in Lightroom. I then opened it up into Photoshop and did a few more things. And I'm just going to click on Photoshop here. And I actually have this image open. There it is in Photoshop, but here it is in Color Effects Pro. And Color Effects Pro is in part of Nick, and I don't use Color Effects Pro a lot, but I typically will look at it for almost all my images and see if I like any of these canned effects over here. In this case, this is Glamour Glow. I've been experimenting with Glamour Glow quite a bit lately for these low light situations. And so I'm going to go over here to what I had actually done to this image. The glow is probably the most important thing. I have that at 63%. And I think by default, Glamour Glow opens up by bringing the saturation down. In this case, it's minus 29, so I don't believe I did anything with that. And I think I drug the warmth down to minus 14%. But lately I've been playing with these sliders down here for shadows and highlights. So if I double click on that highlight slider, it brings it back to plus 44%. And I think that must be the default. But you can see in here, it's a little lacking detail and a little blown out. So if I drag that highlight slider up, it's going to restore some of the detail in here and also in here. Also shadows, I think the default is 41%. If I drug this down, it is darkening those shadows areas, but it's still leaving some detail. You can still tell that there are these walls back here, these really impressive walls. But I like what that did by dragging that down, and I'm going to drag it all the way down. But the nice thing about, I'm going to go cancel because I already have this in Photoshop as an effect. I'm going to cancel that. The nice thing about using Nik in Photoshop is that it will open up as a layer here. In this case, you can see I have the layer here, and my computer's waking up here. It's less than optimal these days. I actually need to have my computer worked on. But here it is in Photoshop, and you can see that there is the layer. The nice thing about it being on a layer is you can turn it on and off and see what it did. But also you can play with the opacity, which is in effect the volume of the effect, how much you want to have. I'm going to drag it all the way up to 100. That's where it'll open up. And you know, I do like that, but I kind of have a feeling it's maybe a little too contrasty, maybe a little dark between here and here, maybe too much of a glow. So I'm going to go back over. It's activated. That layer is activated. And I'm going to bring that back down to, maybe about there, 83%. I like that. I really like what that did. It really darkened these areas. You don't really need to see what's going on down in here, or over in here, or back in there. But if you can see a little bit, it's really nice. You know, that's the important thing. I think the important elements of this image, of course, is this monastery. The low light is just really making this image, and the way it's kissing these little ridges here is just really spectacular. But you can still see detail back in here, so you're still, that's another element of this image. It's creating this dramatic effect of this monastery surrounded by these cliffs, these big huge rocks. I did not do much else in Photoshop. I know I did do some spot healing. There was a person on this bridge. There's a bridge right here. If I was to, I probably did some other cleanup around in the image. If I was to do more, I would probably remove some of these in here, these highlights. I also might do a little bit of dodging in here to bring this out a little bit more. But those are just minor tweaks, and I'll just show you again. That is the image that was processed in Lightroom and then brought into Photoshop and processed mainly with Nik. So I like it. I hope you do too. And if you're not using Nik, I think it's really a worthwhile add-on for Photoshop. You can also use it with Lightroom as well if you're not a Photoshop user. So there you go. Hey, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.